Please be seated. Back on the record in the case of People versus Davion Thompson, the jury is not present at this time. And Mr. Fedoruk, are you prepared to call your next witness?
Your Honor, yes, we'll be calling Dr. Caitlin Matz Bishop. She'll be testifying via Zoom, and we have it set up. I'm hoping it will work. Should work. So.
All right. Anything else for the record?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. O'Farrell.
No, Your Honor.
You can bring the jury in. You may be seated. Mr. Fedoruk, you may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The people called Dr. Caitlin Bishop Matz.
This testimony is live, but is being presented via Zoom. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right. And you should be able to see it on your monitor there as well. You may proceed.
And Your Honor, does the court want to swear in Dr. Matz?
Yes.
Please raise your right hand, doctor. You solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give in this cause for pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Thank you, Your Honor. One thing for the record before we get to Dr. Matz. There is a stipulation as far as the medical records. That's People's Exhibit 46. I believe there is. One second.
And for the record, after they were obtained from the hospital of my client's medical treatment.
So-
We do stipulate.
All right, Exhibit 46 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, good afternoon, Dr. Matz. You can hear me?
Ken, it's Dr. Bishop now. It was Dr. Matz at the time of the visit, but just for the record, it's one and the same person.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Bishop, could you please state your full name, spelling first and last?
Caitlin, K-A-I-T-L-Y-N, Bishop, B-I-S-H-O-P.
And how are you employed?
I work at Covenant Hospital in Saginaw.
All right. And so you are a doctor, is that correct?
Correct.
And do you have a specialization as far as as far as being a doctor?
Yes. Yes, I'm board certified emergency medicine.
Okay. And could you just briefly describe your training and experience with respect to that certification?
Sure. So I went to medical school at Michigan State University, osteopathic. I did my residency, which was a 4-year residency at Genesis, and then received my board certification through the American Board of Emergency Medicine.
With that, Your Honor, the people would move to qualify Dr. Bishop as a expert in emergency medicine.
Mr. O'Farrell,
I have no questions, Judge. I would stipulate for expertise.
you will be so recognized.
Thank you, Your Honor. So Dr. Bishop, January 26, 2018, do you recall being on, having working that day at the hospital?
Yeah, my schedule shows that I worked. I was actually working the evening of the 25th into the morning of the 26th.
Okay. And that's Covenant in Saginaw, correct?
Correct.
And on that date, do you recall being assigned to take care of a Davion Thompson?
So as the record shows, I did see him as a patient. I don't have personal recollection of the visit, but I do have access to my charts, and I did see him on that evening, yes.
Okay. And when you treat a patient, this is something that you would commonly do, take notes, put them in a medical records so that you can recall that later on. Is that correct? All right. Now, with respect to Dr. Thompson, with respect to Mr. Thompson, what did you, what were the symptoms that you were treating him for?
So I believe the triage note in the records, let me just pull up that.
And if you can, Dr. Bishop, is it possible for you to move the records away from your laptop? Maybe they're just picking up the
yeah,
sound
I'm
of
sorry.
shuffling. Okay, thank you.
The shuffling is probably, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So he came in with a fever, shortness of breath, and sore throat since the previous Sunday.
Okay. And what was the date and time specifically that he was admitted?
So it looks like the triage was completed on January 25th at 11:04 p.m. And I believe the discharge was completed at on January 26th at 2:38 in the morning.
Okay. And in your records, do they reflect whether Mr. Thompson either walked into the hospital or had to be assisted into the hospital?
Yeah, actually, and I don't know if the pages correspond to the pages in the exhibit, but page 26 of my records, the triage flow sheet that was completed by nursing staff. One of the questions is the patient ambulatory? And at 23:02 on January 25th, the nurse completed that and said, yes, he was ambulatory. So he was ambulatory when he came into the hospital that evening, yes.
And what would that mean, being ambulatory?
It means he can walk on his own. He didn't require a wheelchair or any assistance.
All right. And now you indicated the symptoms. Those were symptoms that he had reported to you?
Correct.
And was there an underlying issue that he had as well?
Yeah, he does have underlying asthma.
Okay. And was he being treated for that at all? Did he have any treatment for that?
Yeah, so his treatment while he was in the emergency department, he did receive a Duonev treatment, I believe, if I went through the records accurately. I also gave him steroids, including Decadron and some Zofran for nausea. It also looks like I gave him some extra strength Tylenol for fever.
Okay, and I apologize. With respect to the asthma, to your knowledge, had he been receiving any treatment for that prior to his visit? Was there something he
Not
was
to my
taking for
knowledge,
that?
but But according to the triage note, I believe the triage note says that he has been using his inhalers at home and that they weren't helping. So he has home inhalers for asthma, and that's pretty typical. Asthmatics will come into the emergency department if their inhalers they feel are not adequately managing their symptoms.
And then, so given did you do an examination of Mr. Thompson? You did, okay. And based on that examination, was there anything additional you found other than his reported symptoms?
So no, according to my examination, there was some tonsillar hypertrophy, meaning they were enlarged, and there were exudates, meaning there was pus on the tonsils. And he had some lymphadenopathy, meaning he had some painful enlarged lymph nodes indicating like a pharyngitis or an upper respiratory infection. But according to my notes, his breath sounds were clear, and I didn't hear any wheezing, and he was not in any respiratory distress.
All right. And so did you have a diagnosis given all of what you found in your examination?
I did. I tested him for strep and mononucleosis, and his monoscreen was positive. So my diagnosis for the patient was mononucleosis.
All right. And I understand there can be either chronic mononucleosis, mononucleosis without complication. Was there anything specific you were able to find as far as the mononucleosis?
Nothing specific. It seemed like a pretty typical presentation according to my chart.
Okay. And I guess follow up, did you find it was a serious condition that he had?
So I guess that exists on a spectrum. If he was so ill that I thought his condition was life-threatening or serious, I would have likely admitted him to the hospital and not discharged him home from the emergency department.
All right. And he was able to walk out of the emergency room then?
He was discharged from the emergency department. Typically, I do not discharge people who cannot walk or ambulate on their own. So I don't have personal recollection of him walking from the emergency department, but I typically do not discharge people who cannot care for themselves or walk from the department.
You wouldn't have discharged him and allowed him to walk out if he was not able to walk, is what you're saying?
Correct. Correct.
Now, the diagnosis you made, is that a contagious condition?
It is.
And how can the condition be spread or the virus be spread?
So the virus is spread through respiratory droplets. So it's close contact, kissing, sneezing, unclean hands, sharing utensils, spread through respiratory contact.
All right. And so most of us today are familiar with COVID, for example, and we all know how contagious that is. So as far as that, this isn't the same thing as far as the contagiousness of the condition?
It is not.
Okay. Much less contagious?
Much less. I don't have numbers or R naught values, but it is much less contagious.
All right. And then, and to that, you know, we're all familiar with the mask requirements that we've gone through with respect to COVID in the last almost 2 years or year and a half or whatnot. With respect to this condition, mononucleosis, is that something that would require a mask be worn?
Prior to the COVID pandemic, I never discharged anyone from the emergency department with a mask or requiring a mask. Obviously, we know that masks work, but that was not my typical practice before this pandemic.
Okay. And was it anything that you would have suggested to Mr. Thompson?
No.
And it wouldn't be anything you would have recommended?
No.
And according to your notes, did you discuss masks at all with him?
Not according to my notes.
Now, with respect to his asthma, is there a need to wear a mask if someone has asthma?
No.
Okay. Would it be beneficial at all for someone who has asthma?
No.
Now, as far as Covenant, if someone being treated at Covenant requested masks from somewhere else in the hospital, would they be able to get access to them?
Yeah, I mean, we have masks around available. It would be easy to access if he would have asked for one. I'm sure someone would have gotten him one. It wouldn't have been myself, but I'm sure he would have been able to get one if he wanted one.
Okay. And then when you discharged Mr. Thompson, or before you discharged him, did you administer any medications?
According to my records, before I discharged him, he got Decadron, Tylenol, and a Duoneb treatment, and I believe ibuprofen as well. So some anti-inflammatories, antipyretics, a steroid, and a breathing treatment is what my records show.
Okay. And any of these medications, were they something where you would advise someone who's taking those not to drive?
No. And we have a policy at Covenant, certain medications require patients to stay a waiting period or have a driver, and none of these medications affect driving.
Now, again, just upon discharge, were there certain tests that were run where you had results of those tests? Are those in your records?
Yes.
Okay, and what were the tests that were run and the results?
The mono screen was positive, and I believe the strep screen came back as negative.
Okay, and that's everything?
I believe so, unless I'm missing a piece of the records.
Okay. And just one final thing. When Mr. Thompson left, were you aware of him leaving any items behind?
No.
Okay.
But again, I don't typically go back in the room after patients leave the hospital rooms.
Okay. And you didn't notice him leave a cell phone behind?
I wouldn't have noticed.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Questions, Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you. Hello again, Doctor.
Hi.
We have two different mics I'm supposed to speak into from this location, so if anybody can't hear me anywhere here that counts, I would ask to just be told that, okay? Did you hear me? Doctor?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't realize you were talking to me because it's hard without eye contact, but yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Now, you have no independent recollection today of this particular visit, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, the person who presented, they came about 11 o'clock at night on the 25th.
I believe so. That's what the record timing is. Mhm.
And so they were there about 3.5 hours, being discharged about 2:28 on the 26th.
That sounds accurate.
And you referred to the triage notes, which is what the complaints and the findings that are made when a person presents themselves.
Yeah, the triage note is completed by the nursing staff, and it basically refers to the complaint that the patient makes when they present to the hospital.
And do you have those? I have a page 5 that has those on them. Do you have that available to you?
For some reason, mine starts on page 7. I must not have printed out the first 6 pages. But so I don't have them in front of me.
When you did your physical exam, is what you found consistent with a complaint of shortness of breath?
Not really. His breath sounds were normal, no respiratory distress. Some people do still have dyspnea despite not having physical findings consistent with respiratory distress because it exists on a continuum.
There was a complaint of acute pharyngitis, unspecified. Were your findings consistent with that?
Yes, they were consistent with pharyngitis.
Okay. And fever, cough, nausea, consistent with that?
Yeah, they're all kind of symptoms that can be attributed to a lot of viral illnesses or bacterial illnesses.
Okay. And dyspnea, dyspnea, what is that?
Shortness of breath.
Myalgia,
Myalgia is body aches.
complaint of headache, tachycardia.
Tachycardia is a fast heart rate.
And then you did find physically localized enlarged lymph nodes, is that correct?
Correct.
And hypertrophy, which would be swelling of the tonsils.
Correct.
And there was also some pus associated with that.
Correct.
Pus being a sign of infection.
Correct.
And then he had a past history of asthma, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, would someone with an underlying condition of asthma be more susceptible to these kinds of respiratory and other findings that you confirmed in his visit?
I'm not sure as more susceptible would be the right term. I mean, the infection is, some people get it, some people don't, but certainly upper respiratory illnesses can be manifested with different or more severe symptoms if you do have an underlying lung disease like asthma or COPD.
Okay. So you provided specific treatments, which you've indicated, including some medications. Did you have an opportunity to observe whether he felt better after those were administered?
I did. According to my note, it said that he was reevaluated after his symptoms were treated and that he felt better, according to my notes. And I apologize, I don't have the all of the records in front of me for some reason, the first 6 pages, but I believe the pain score also dropped according to nurse triage notes, but again, I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. So he certainly wasn't feeling good when he came to the hospital, and he was feeling better when he left. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Now, you mentioned that you would not admit someone presenting with these findings unless it was life-threatening or serious, requiring further hospitalization. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I believe the hospital has certain criteria in which to judge, and the insurance companies as well, as to whether a person should be admitted or not. And in your opinion, he did not meet those criteria for a further admission. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
So when you discharged him, it was with instructions to hopefully feel better, and if he didn't, to get a hold of his family doctor right away. Is that right?
Correct.
So with his underlying condition of asthma and the issues that he had as far as his health at that time, you indicated that if he asked for a mask, certainly he would have been provided that upon discharge. Is that correct?
I would assume so. If he asked the nursing or support staff for a mask, that we would have given it to him.
Thank you, doctor. I have no further questions.
Anything else, Mr. Fedora?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bishop.
Thank you.
And you can log off now, doctor. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Fedora, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor,
Thank-
may I just, I had stipulated, I believe, the admission of the medical records of Exhibit 46. With the doctor's testimony, she may have been missing some pages. When there's an opportunity, could I examine the exhibit just to make sure that the complete hospital records are in that exhibit? I don't have to do it now. I would
Okay.
like to check to see, could she have missing pages?
All right.
And they are, Your Honor.
Proceed.
I can give the copy to Mr. Farrell.
As long as it's all together, Judge, and I'll trust Mr. Fedora to say truthful.
That's fine.
People would next call Agent Nathan Sitara.
Sutara.
Good afternoon. And you just spelled your last name. Could you just state your full name and spell your first name as well?
Yes, Nathan Sutara, Nathan, last Sutara.
And you are currently an agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is that correct?
With the ATF.
ATF, I'm sorry. And I'm going to refer to January 2018. At that time, what agency were you working for?
I was a trooper with the Michigan State Police.
All right. And do you recall being on duty that day?
Yes,
Do you recall receiving a dispatch report regarding a shooting?
yes. So I was attached to the major crimes unit. So I was a detective trooper. And at about 12:30, 12:45, I got a call from my supervisor saying that there was a shooting and a possibly homicide that had just occurred.
And upon receiving that report, what did you do?
Myself and another detective responded to the scene.
And who is the other detective?
Bryant Greener.
And approximately when did you arrive at the scene, do you recall?
The shooting occurred at approximately 12:30 p.m. in the afternoon. So we got there between 1 and 1:30 in the afternoon.
Now, what was your role or duty upon arriving at the scene?
We met with Saginaw detectives. They stated that they were going to be handling the investigation, and they requested assistance with photographing the scene and collecting evidence.
And again, what was the address of the murder or shooting scene?
It was 522 South Bond Street, Saginaw, Michigan.
All right. And just to clarify, you were notified that a homicide had occurred as well.
Yes.
All right. Now, up on the screen, if you can see it, is People's Exhibit 20. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
And do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And then underneath that is Exhibit 21 on the monitor. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And what are those photographs showing?
So that was the original crime scene when we arrived. Saginaw Police had already marked several pieces of evidence, so that way we would be able to know where they are and to prevent them from moving or shifting around.
Before I proceed, Your Honor, just want to check if there is a pointer, laser pointer on the witness stand. Would the court indulge me to check behind the curtains and see if they have a laser pointer available?
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, do you recall the evidence exactly that you observed on the driveway of that residence?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And what are the items that you ended up locating?
In total, we located 3 shell casings, a laser sight that should be attached to a pistol. We located slippers that we believe to be the victims, several bullet fragments that were located on the driveway, and a black beanie style cap.
Now, with respect to the 3 shell casings, so with respect to People's Exhibit 20 up there on the monitor, if I had you walk up to the projector there, would you be able to point out where the individual items were found?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, if Agent Satura can move off the stand to do that.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
So the first shell casing, we labeled this A, was located right here. The next shell casing, we lettered it C as in Charles, was located right here. And the third one was D as in David, was right here.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a laser pointer as well. Where
Yes,
was that located?
we labeled that B as in boy, and that was right here.
Okay. And then with respect to the slug fragments, are you able to point those out?
Yes, there was one slug fragment. It's way back here. It was by the house. This was letter I. And then the other slug fragment is right here.
Okay. And then if you put on top of that exhibit 20, the house, you indicated there was a bullet lodged into the side of the home. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Where did you find that?
So that's me standing in the photograph right there, and it's just off my right shoulder.
Okay. Thank you. And you can have a seat.
Yes, it is. It's items that we labeled as A as in Adam, C as in Charles, D as in David, and those were the 3 shell casings that I just pointed out. Yes. Yes, I do. This was the laser sight, which was B as in boy, as I previously indicated.
Mr. O'Farrell,
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 62 and 63 will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And then Agent Satura, so once you had everything collected, what did you do with it?
We took it back to Saginaw Police Department for the detectives to look through and then to ultimately take to the lab for a forensic evaluation.
Okay. And then with respect to the items you collected, are there any precautions you take or any procedures you follow when you're collecting the evidence?
Yes, before we touch any piece of evidence, we always put on gloves to ensure the integrity of the item.
All right. And did you do that in this case?
Yes, we did.
And then with respect to the laser sight, hang on. So on the monitor is People's Exhibit 22. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
That is the laser sight that we recovered.
Okay. And so with respect to the laser sight, again, you put the gloves on before collecting that item.
Yes, we did.
And in your time at that location, were you able to see whether anyone else came into contact, touched the laser sight?
Nobody else touched the laser sight while we were there.
And then the defendant in this case is Davion Thompson. You didn't have any contact with Davion Thompson that day, correct?
No, I did not.
And prior to that day, you didn't have any contact with Mr. Thompson.
That is correct. I've never had contact with Mr. Thompson.
That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, questions, Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Judge. Agent Sotera, the casings would be what part of a bullet?
So that's where the gunpowder goes that helps the bullet project out of the gun.
So when you put bullets into a magazine, the casing is attached and the bullet is within it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so then when the bullet goes up into the chamber and is actually struck by the firing pin, the casing separates and the bullet is ejected out through the barrel. Is that right?
That is correct.
So the casings that you found were not fired bullets, but they were the remains of a bullet that had been fired.
That is correct. When you pull a trigger and a bullet is fired, the shell casing is ejected from the firearm to allow the next round to be loaded into the chamber.
Okay. And I used an example of a magazine, but firearms can also be a revolver type that does not eject casings. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But is well, there are automatic weapons, but as far as weapons in the public area in Michigan, is there what's commonly called a semi-automatic?
Yes.
And those are legal?
Yes, they are.
And do they have a magazine that holds the casing, the bullet, the unfired bullet?
Not the unfired bullet, or excuse me, yes, the unfired bullet. You load the round of ammunition into the magazine, which is what allows the firearm to fire a bullet.
Okay. And then the actual mechanism is that when you do pull the trigger and fire the bullet, there's an ejection mechanism that kicks that casing out and the next one comes in ready to fire. Is that right?
That is correct.
So a semi-automatic can be fired just as quick as you can pull the trigger.
Yes.
You mentioned taking these items that you seized to the city police so that they could record them and have them for their investigative records?
Yes, so we collected all the evidence, took it back to the Saginaw City Police Department where we stored it in a locked container. So that way Saginaw City detectives could review the evidence, log it into their chain of custody, their actual evidence vault. And if whatever evidence needed to be taken to the lab for forensic evaluations, such as the shell casings, they would do that.
Okay. I think I may have misunderstood one of your responses. You and your team did not actually take the items for further forensic examination. Is that correct?
That is correct. We did not.
And that would not have been your responsibility.
No.
If such forensic exams were going to be ordered, they should have been ordered through the detectives of the Saginaw City.
That is correct.
Forensic exams would be like examinations for fingerprints or DNA or other type of microscopic or scientific examination.
Yes.
So you have no knowledge of if or when that was done in this case.
No, I do not.
And you've described to the jury your full involvement with this case.
Yes, we were there to photograph the scene, collect the evidence, and then everything was turned over to Saginaw City detectives.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything else, Mr. Fedora?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
You may step down. Call your next witness, Mr. Fedora.
People call Jeff Wenzel. Good afternoon, Mr. Wenzel. Could you please state your full name, spelling first and last for the record?
Jeffrey Wenzel, Jefffery. His name is Wenzel, Wenzell.
And is it proper to call you Mr. Wenzel now?
Sure.
And at the time of this investigation, in this case, you were a detective with the Saginaw Police Department, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And since then, you have retired, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, I'm going to ask you about the Antonio Parham murder investigation in a minute. But what I wanted to get to before that, there was a homicide investigation that preceded that. It was somewhat related. Brandon Pennywell's murder investigation. You're familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. And did you play a role in Brandon Pennywell's murder investigation?
Yes, I was one of the investigators.
Okay. And who were the other investigators who were involved?
And the Brandon Pennywell one was Detective Wortley.
And do you recall offhand when that murder occurred?
It's a couple months prior to, that was November-ish of 2017.
And what was your, I guess, general or what duties did you play in that investigation?
We investigated, we were called to scene on South Michigan Avenue, southwest side, where Brandon Pennywell was discovered deceased inside of the vehicle. Investigation led that Davian Thompson had been with Mr. Pennywell. We had obtained video from the casino that evening confirming that. We had originally down the road, later that evening, we made contact with Davian Thompson and he denied being with Mr. Pennywell that evening.
All right. And so you consulted Mr. Thompson about that particular incident?
Correct.
All right. And so you've had face-to-face contact with Mr. Thompson?
Correct.
And if you saw him today, would you recognize him?
Yes.
And do you see him in the courtroom?
Yes.
And can you just identify him by an item of his clothing and where he is?
Sitting next to Mr. O'Farrell wearing a gray sweater maybe and a blue long sleeve shirt.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Wenzel identified the defendant.
It shall reflect.
Now, so in the course of that investigation, you spoke to Mr. Thompson. Did you speak to anyone else regarding information?
Yes. Brandon's mother, Lisa Curtis.
And was there anything helpful that you obtained from Ms. Curtis?
She was, anything, she'd try to hear things or on the street, she'd forward them to us so we could look into them a little bit further and decipher if it was a credible tip or not.
And was there anything in particular that came about from Ms. Curtis that you found helpful?
Not for me, no.
And you said Detective Wortley also worked on that case.
Correct.
Did Detective Wortley have contact with Ms. Curtis?
Yes.
And were you aware of anything helpful that Ms. Curtis had provided to Detective Wortley?
Yes.
And anything specific you're able to tell the jury today?
Well, when I arrived on scene, if you could fast forward to, I believe it was January 27th, 522 South Bond, I learned that Antonio Parham was rumored to be the subject that killed Brandon Pennywell.
Okay. And had that been information that your office, your department had received prior to that date?
Yes.
Okay. And what's your understanding of how you received it?
I received it on the scene. Again, what we're trying to do
And
is,
sorry to interrupt you,
Okay.
Mr. Wenzel, but do you have knowledge as to how your department had received it before the murder?
Officer or Detective Wortley obtained that from Lisa Curtis.
Okay. And again, that was prior to the Parham murder.
Correct.
Now, was there ongoing attempts to contact Mr. Thompson during that investigation, or just Ms. Curtis?
We're talking the Brandon Pennywell homicide?
Correct.
Yes, we've tried to speak with Davian several times, and we had no luck.
Okay. Would he refuse to talk to you, or just wouldn't give you any good information?
We go to his house, we call the phone number we had on file, leave messages, to no avail.
And are you familiar with an individual named Garland Davis?
No, I'm not.
Okay. And so he wasn't someone who was cooperative in that Pennywell investigation?
Not that I don't recall that name at all.
Okay. And anyone named Jamel?
No,
Okay. Anyone named Keisha, Rose, Mark, Matt that you consulted regarding the Pennywell investigation?
not that I'm aware of, no.
Now, just kind of jump forward. You mentioned the Antonio Parham murder investigation. So you were informed about Parham's murder. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And was that shortly after it occurred, or what's the timeline after it had occurred?
I don't recall the time they contacted me at home, but I was at home. I believe it was on a weekend. I believe the shooting homicide occurred around 12:30-ish. Within minutes, they contacted us at home. Department, obtain our vehicles and necessary equipment, then off to 522 South Bond is where we went. So, you know, I was there probably within 30 minutes of the incident occurring.
Okay. And that's the murder scene, 522 South Bond. That's where you initially went.
Correct.
And as far as the date, we're talking about January 27th, 2018. Is that your recollection of the date?
Yes.
Now, what did you do at the murder scene?
We arrived on scene. Began speaking with Detective Sergeant Giroux, Detective Jacobs, Detective Wortley. Began, to talk about what evidence was on scene, any other radio traffic. At that point is when we learned that a possible black Dodge Charger was involved.
Okay. And did you have any other information about the Dodge Charger?
Yes,
And what was that?
I knew that Lisa Curtis, Brandon Pennywell's mother, owned a black Dodge Charger.
Okay. And did you receive any information confirming this Dodge Charger belonged to Ms. Curtis?
I believe during the radio traffic, they had indicated Saginaw Township Police Department located that Dar's Charger at Camelot Apartments out in Saginaw Township. And I believe it was some radio traffic in reference to registered owner being Lisa Curtis. With that being said, I still had Lisa Curtis's phone number in my cellular phone. I believe I called her at that point in time and asked her, hey, do you have your black Charger? She said, no. And I recall her saying that Davian Thompson, she had borrowed the black Charger to Davian Thompson.
And this was in a phone conversation?
Yes.
All right. And after that phone conversation, what did you do?
We had asked if we could come speak with her at her place of employment. She had agreed to speak with us, and myself and Detective Wortley went to her place of employment.
And do you recall offhand where her place of employment was?
I believe it's King Communications. It's across the river on the east side on Water Street, near the old Saginaw News, or what the farmer's market is now.
Now, prior to this, did you go to the Camelot Apartments at all prior to contacting Ms. Curtis?
No, I believe this was after. Recall, we spoke to Ms. Curtis for a short period of time, then we went to Camelot Apartments.
Okay. And so after talking to Ms. Curtis on the phone, you then went and visited Ms. Curtis?
Correct.
Now, upon contacting her at her office, was there any other information you obtained relevant to the investigation?
She had just mentioned that she had borrowed the car with Davian Thompson. We'd asked, because we knew from the Brennan Pennywell investigation, she lived out there. We'd asked if we could search her apartment. She had agreed, give us permission. So that's when we went right directly after speaking with her to Camelot Apartments. We pulled in there. I recall seeing a black Dodge Charger on a flatbed wrecker. Detective Wortley and I, it could have been another uniformed officer, went to Lisa Curtis's apartment, entered the apartment. We weren't looking for objects, we were looking for human beings, and there was no one inside the apartment whatsoever. So that's when we left and locked the doors.
Okay. And was it just the one apartment that you searched?
Myself, yes,
Okay. Was there another apartment that was being looked at?
there was.
Okay.
I don't have any, I don't recall. I had no involvement in that.
All right. Now, just to clarify, I think you said Ms. Curtis had borrowed the Charger to Davion. Is that how you termed it?
Yes,
Okay. So but she was lending she said she had lent the car to Mr. Thompson. Is that
correct.
Okay. I say things a little bit different, so I
That's
just
fine.
want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. And sorry, was there any other information other than that you obtained from Ms. Curtis?
No,
Now, after your contact with Ms. Curtis, was she considered a suspect in the Parham investigation?
no,
And at that point, January 27th, did you have any other role in the Antonio Parham murder investigation?
no.
Well, I have. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, questions, Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Wenzel, this was back in January 27th of 18. Do you remember when you retired from the city PD?
A couple days after that, it was, let's say Tuesday, like the 31st or possibly, or whatever the Tuesday following.
And you had been working with Detective Wortley
on Brandon Pennywell's homicide. Is that correct?
Correct.
Detective Wortley was still working after you retired. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Now, he's not listed as a witness in this case today. Do you know if he's retired also?
Yes, he is.
You know roughly when he retired?
Could not give you a specific date, but estimate a year and a half after I retired.
Now, Lisa Curtis had not only Brandon Pennywell, who had been the victim of a homicide, but she had another twin son who was also the victim of a homicide. Is that correct?
Yes, Cameron.
Cameron?
Yes.
And do you remember approximately when Cameron was killed?
2 years, 2.5 years prior to Brandon on southeast side of town.
Were you also involved in the investigation of that homicide?
I was the evidence tech for that homicide.
What does an evidence tech do?
Collect evidence, fired cartridge casings, DNA, blood swab, try to recreate the event, for things like this, trials. So we'll be able to do that, and we usually send things into the crime lab for identification purposes, those type of things.
Do you know if Davion Thompson's was part of the investigation into Cameron's death?
Yes, I know he was.
Do you know if he was a friend of Cameron?
I would assume so.
You know if eventually he testified in that case leading to the conviction of Cameron's killer?
That I don't. I know I testified in there. We were all sequestered. I don't recall if he was or not.
Okay. Now turning to Brandon Pennywell. Cameron's the one twin. Now I'm back to Brandon. Okay?
Yes,
You've indicated that Davion denied being at the casino with Brandon.
no, he died being with Brandon.
Yeah, he denied it.
Correct.
You had video that showed that he was.
Correct.
So he wasn't anxious to tell you the truth about that. Is that correct?
That's what our thought was yes.
Perhaps he didn't want to get involved in giving testimony again?
Your opinion, I'm not sure. I took
Okay.
it as not being truthful.
Now, you've indicated that information was received from Lisa Curtis concerning suspicion that Antonio Parham had shot her son Brandon. Correct?
Could you repeat that question for me?
Lisa Curtis provided information that she believed showed that Antonio Parham had shot her son Brandon.
Correct.
And you referred to information she provided to Detective Wortley.
Correct.
You know if that was provided on January 24th, 3 days before the homicide of Mr. Parham?
It's possible. I don't know when exactly. The day I found out about it was the day of the homicide,
Okay.
January 27th.
Okay. Did you do any, in the 3 or 4 days that you had left of your employment, did you follow up on that information that Lisa had provided concerning Antonio Parham?
I believe that's what Detective Wortley and Jacobs were doing.
So other detectives took over?
Correct. I was there because of my knowledge towards the Brandon Pennywell. If I could help out, I would, and that's why I was there.
Okay. Now, while you're there at the scene, there's information introduced, whether it's by radio traffic or whatever from Saginaw Township, that Lisa Curtis's black Dodge Charger is involved in this shooting. Is that right?
I don't think the township told us that the charge was involved in the shooting because the incident happened in the city of Saginaw. So if that was the case, city officers would be broadcasting, hey, this black Charger was in. So I believe city officers broadcasted that, hey, there was a black Charger involved in a city of Saginaw shooting. Saginaw Township officers located the black Charger in Saginaw Township at Camelot Apartments.
Is their investigation confirmed that it was Lisa Curtis's vehicle?
To my knowledge, yes,
And you still had the phone number of Lisa Curtis,
correct,
so you called her
yes,
and she was at King Communications at work.
correct,
And you asked her who had her car?
yes,
And did she tell you the last one she knew was Davion Thompson?
said she lent the car to Davion Thompson.
You don't remember her exact words, do you?
Well, it was as much as clear as I can be right there, because when I asked her a question, she didn't she didn't give me any other names except Davion Thompson. And I've dealt with Davion Thompson before, so it clicked a little bit.
You recall testifying before under oath in this previous trial in this case on March 2nd of 2021?
I'm sure I did, if you have it there.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
Can I just ask what page?
That's fine.
Going down to 17, need to orient yourself. With testimony.
Okay.
I didn't need as much as you need to.
Okay. Yep.
And at that time, did you testify under oath? And then when I called her, I think she said that the defendant had the car, was the last one to have the car.
Those were my words according to that, yes.
Do you believe this transcript is not accurate?
I believe it's accurate, yes.
Okay. So Lisa Curtis was at work when you called her, right?
Yes,
And that's at King Communications over on, is that South Washington or North Washington?
South Water Street,
South Water.
yes,
So at that time, she would have no way of knowing who was driving her car at or near that time. Would you agree with that?
correct.
Do you know exactly what it was that Lisa Curtis provided to Detective Wortley that she thought implicated Antonio Parham in killing her son, Brandon?
I just recall Detective Wortley telling me that Lisa Curtis advised him of Antonio Parham being the shooter of Brandon, her son Brandon. I did get he never told me specifics, reference that whatsoever, no.
Okay. So you never saw any social media, Facebook communications or anything like that that she had forwarded from other people to the police?
No, I did not see that.
Since you were retiring in 3 days or so, I assume that pretty much sums up exactly all that you did in connection with this particular investigation.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Wenzel.
thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Fedora?
Just real quick, so Detective Wenzel, according to what you knew, the defendant didn't give any information as to Antonio Parham being the killer of Brandon Pennywell, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
You may step down. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break at this time, and I noticed that some of you are having trouble seeing the witness stand, so we're going to try to work that out during the break as well, okay? Short break. Record should reflect the jury is not present at this time, and then for the record, Mr. Fedora,
No, Your Honor.
Mr. O'Farrell.
And I'm just wondering who we have left opposed to this afternoon. I don't know. Suppose
Well, Detective Matt Giroux is present, so I'll be calling him. I'll just have to look into Ms. Ziem. Does the court have that video ready if we have to play the video?
Yep,
Does it need to be reviewed?
not Ms. Ziem, because there's no break in between hers, but Ms. Graham, we want to make sure that it's smooth. We've had two things that are spliced together, the direct and the cross. We haven't reviewed Ms. Graham's or Ms. Ziem is just one straight testimony without breaking it. So that one should be ready to be played.
Okay. We may be doing that. I just have to look into that a little bit further.
Okay, so what is it you need to look into exactly? If we call your next witness, then what is it you need to see?
Well, so I'll be calling Detective Matt Giroux. If we don't have Ms. Ziem available, then I'll be asking to play the video.
That's what I'm saying. Is she here or she's not here?
Right now, she's not here.
Okay.
And the information I have isn't promising to be.
Okay, so we anticipate after Detective Giroux playing Ms. Ziem's testimony, right?
Looks like that unless there's a surprise and she shows up.
Okay, and then after that, do you have any other witnesses available today?
No, that would be all.
Okay. Well, anything else, Mr. O'Farrell?
Oh, Your Honor, thank you.
I will take a short break, and you want to take Mr. Thompson back, we have some housekeeping matters. We need to figure out what's going on with this witness.